quick, fun intro. So I've learned a little bit that I need to put a disclosure on here so that I don't need to edit the video and add a disclosure later. So if you're watching this on YouTube right now, you are joining the Michigan chapter of the Financial Planning Association. We get together about 6 times a year to talk about all things financial planning. We bring guests on to talk about financial planning and different aspects of the profession. None of this information can be taken as advice. It's all educational only. You know all the other disclosures down in the description. So with that being said, welcoming our extra special guest today, Lindsay Bryan-Podvin. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. Lindsay is the founder of the business Mind Money Balance, which is a financial wellness and financial therapy company. She is an author, speaker, educator at University of Michigan, and is involved in course creation and education curriculum at the university. She has been cited in multiple publications, including CNN, Vox, Real Simple, CNBC, BuzzFeed, NPR, just to name a few. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the FPA of Michigan chapter.
Thanks, Colin. It's so nice to be here.
So, Lindsay, we got to start out with explaining what in the world financial therapy even is. This group is pretty well versed because we understand the importance of having great conversations around money. But maybe for anyone listening, probably know what therapy is.
Yeah.
We know what financial planning is. What is the mix here, and what is kind of your angle in this financial therapy?
Yeah, it's a great question and it's kind of like the start of a bad joke. It's like a psychologist and a financial planner walk into a bar, but that is kind of how the discipline got carved out. About 10 years ago, the Financial Therapy Association was formed, and it really was born out of something that folks in both disciplines, both in the therapy discipline and in the financial planning discipline, found that they had clients coming in who were bringing stressors or problems to them that were a little bit outside of their scope. And while each profession didn't want to necessarily switch professions, they wanted a bit more education and information so they could better support their clients. And so, thus, the financial therapy discipline was born. I am a social worker by training, so I'm a clinical therapist, and I've been a psychotherapist for over a decade. So when I got my training as a financial therapist, I still continue to practice as a therapist with that financial behavior support kind of coming in to provide some additional help. Whereas somebody who is CFP and gets their financial therapy certification, they would still provide financial planning, but they'd have some extra skills to provide that emotional support. So it's really the intersection of money and mental health, but whoever is acting as the person who has this certificate is still acting in their home discipline. So I'm not like cosplaying or pretending to be a financial planner or like moonlighting as an advisor. I continue to stay in my lane as a therapist.
Great. And leaning into that financial therapy topic, what was your journey as a financial therapist? How did you get started? What was your experience so far? And how did you get involved in the industry?
I zigged and zagged and eventually fell into it. I wish I had this like very clear trajectory of how I ended up here. But a lot of it was a mix of both my personal life and my professional life. So as I shared, I went into clinical therapy, and in my first job as a social worker with a master's degree, I got my first paycheck and was kind of flabbergasted that I was earning less money than I did when I was a waitress. And I experienced not just the stress from being in a situation where I was now living paycheck to paycheck and the stress that that causes, but I also experienced a ton of emotional baggage and shame because I came from financial privilege and that my parents supported me through school. So I came out without debt, and yet I was still struggling, and I just felt like I kind of squandered the gift that they provided me, and it really impacted my mental health and my mental well-being. So personally, I was experiencing a lot of distress, and then professionally, a lot of my clients as you can imagine, working with folks who are experiencing things like depression and anxiety, they would come in with financial stressors. And my training, Anna Maria, told me to basically say, like, here's an 800 number so your electric doesn't get shut off, or, have you thought about going to a food bank? But it didn't really equip me to say, let's see what we can do to ensure that, yes, we get your needs met now and we meet, your kind of crisis now. And what can we do to provide you with the skills and the steps so that you aren't here again? And I just felt like there was this big disconnect between money and mental health, and we were treating each of them in these different silos. And especially when it came to financial advice, I'm sure, as y'all know, being in the FPA, a lot of it, whether it's true or not, I think a lot of folks have an idea that there are two kind of ways to get help for money. And it's either if you're in a lot of debt and you need to declare bankruptcy, or it's for people who have lots and lots of generational wealth. And I think there's a huge misnomer that there can be professional support for the people who are in the middle. But I too was naive to go, where do people go if they aren't on either end of that spectrum? So anyway, it just became like this irritating thing, like a dog with a bone. And as I continued on in my career and I went to different jobs and started earning more, I just couldn't get it out of my head, and eventually got certified in financial therapy and in financial social work, and went into private practice to practice financial therapy full time.
Great. And how was that transition compared to from going to the private sector and starting your own company? So how
Yeah.
did you get started with filling up your practice, and how did that transition go for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I did it slowly and steadily. So I worked in a nonprofit, then I worked in academic research, then I joined a group therapy practice. So the way a group therapy practice works is that you're an independent contractor and you give them a percentage of your revenue in exchange for them doing things like the admin, covering rent. They're often bringing in the marketing referrals. And so I did that for a few years. And thankfully, the group that I was with was supportive of me having my own website, having my own branding, and being, in this field. I tracked everything, where are my referrals coming from? How often am I seeing clients? What's going on? And this was pre-pandemic, but I was starting to see a shift in where my clients were coming from and also how I was seeing them. So I was seeing about 30% of my clients via telehealth. So in my head, I'm like, if I'm only seeing 70% of my clients in person, does it really make sense to keep paying for this office, essentially, with that fee split? And also, when I have my clients come in, I'm always asking them, how did you hear about me? And I started noticing that no longer were they writing down the group therapy practice, they were writing down my website. So I started to see this trend, and I was like, it was a great place to be at to start expanding, but I slowly left over time. And then the ironic part or good part, I don't know how you want to spin this one, but I gave my notice in January of 2020 that I was going to leave full time. And you had to give them 90-day notice. And so I left in April of 2020. And because I'd already been doing telehealth or psychotherapy over things like this, and a lot of my colleagues weren't, I was already ahead of the curve. I already had the system set up. I already had a website in place. And so my practice kind of exploded because a lot of my colleagues were saying things like, we'll just go back into the office in 2 weeks, or they were scrambling, trying to figure out new software, new technology, whereas I had had the advantage of already doing that for probably 2 years before I went full time. So I had like a nice kind of ease into private practice, and then it was kind of like a hockey stick moment.
That's really exciting. I think a lot of people on the call can relate to that. I know I can, running a virtual practice. Stephanie, maybe Ariel, maybe taking notes on running a virtual business, keeping low overhead, thinking about your expenses. And a lot of the next gen wants convenience, and just being able to jump on a Zoom call is a little easier than driving 30 minutes, finding parking. especially if maybe you're targeting a certain demographic that maybe has kids, or and really, who doesn't like to be able to meet with a trusted advisor partner in their sweatpants?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
I'm wearing sweatpants right now. So where do you draw, like, how are you able to kind of merge these, maybe therapy first, and then you notice the huge gap in finances, like, and you mentioned like trying to like stay in your lane of therapy and not being a moonlighting advisor. I'm sure you're a much better financial coach and advisor than most advisors who call themselves advisors. But like, how are you able to navigate that? Do you just mainly stay away from the investment specific advice and everything else is kind of fair game? I know there's kind of some rules against that. Where do you kind of find your niche in that? Is budgeting or debt reduction maybe a hot topic?
Yeah, great question. So what I tend to say to my clients, and also that I kind of use as my guideline, is anything that kind of falls under the financial literacy umbrella is fair game. So anything that you would get in like a how to make a budget 101 personal finance book is perfectly fine. But to your point, anytime we get to things like where should I invest my retirement? What types of allocations should I have? What's a good ROI on these different mutual funds? Anytime we're getting into something that, I was on the call earlier, anytime that sounds like it belongs in a category of advising, I also don't want my license at stake. So I'm really clear to say that's an amazing question. It's outside of my scope. And then that's where having relationships with financial planners who I trust is incredibly important, because then I can say, it's outside of my scope, but here are 3 people who clients have loved working with. Would you be open to me, making a connection for you? Or if they're not there yet, I can often kind of do a little bit of an on-ramp, like maybe listen to like these 3 podcast episodes just to kind of figure out like where you want to go, and then we can see what makes the most sense. But for me, I say about 80% of my work is in the realm of psychology, social work, emotions, and then about 20% of it is in the how-to. So I tend to think about my work of less how to make a budget and much more what's getting in the way of making it. Why is it hard for you to talk to your partner about it? What worked last month when you review it and what didn't, and how can we tweak it? So again, it's that scaffolding and that support that is coming from that emotional side.
Makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that maybe working with advisors and having that cutoff. We're a group of advisors. Where should we be thinking about maybe our weaknesses and the therapy side, and maybe sending them to you or a therapist? Or like, how can we be better therapists in our own financial planning first
Yeah,
practices? Because we
yeah.
all know money has its own personal wound up things hidden behind it.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer the second half of that question first, which is like, what are some things that we can do as advisors to support our clients? And then I'll answer like, when should we get a financial therapist on board? So one thing that I think we all like to do, especially when, we have that fresh, eager excitement, if we just passed an exam, we just got our license, we're ready to go, we're like, I have all the answers, is we often want to impart all of this wisdom onto clients, not asking for their consent yet. And what I mean by that is, so often a client comes in and they say like, hey, here's what's going on, here's where I need some help. And, Colin, I'm picking on you because you're who I can see. And Colin, you're like, oh my gosh, great. I've got this 10-point plan. Let me get it out for you. Here you go. We can start tomorrow. That may be a very, very, very good plan on paper, and it actually might be the best fit for the client. But before we even get into problem solving and advising, asking them like, okay, you gave me this problem. How how do you want us to solve it? What are the things in your life that you're comfortable changing or tweaking, or what are the things that are getting in the way? So hanging out for a second to get their consent, or maybe you say something like, hey, I've got like an amazing 10-step plan in my head. Can I share it with you? Gives them permission to say, you know what, Colin, let's just do the first 3 steps. I don't think I can take all 10 right now, but let's just see what you've got. Or even they can say, yeah, I'm game. Let's do it. Give them all to me. But this does a few things is it gives them the autonomy to say, yes, I'm ready for that thing, or no, I'm not ready yet. And when it comes to helping our clients' behavior change for the better, for what they're saying that they want to be there for, when they are bought in, they're going to be more likely to make that change. Um, and I know that with the FPA, you're doing so much more of kind of eliciting for the why behind why they want to do what they want to do with their money. But that's like one of the big things is before you get into advice giving, ask for buy-in and ask for consent. And then when it comes to when should I refer to a therapist, this is a bit of a gut check one. I can imagine everybody on the call has had that client where you feel like, I feel like I'm pretending to be a therapist right now. They're calling you all the time. You're getting these emails that are, novels in length. As soon as 8 o'clock strikes or 9 o'clock strikes, whatever time your working hour strikes, that phone is going to ring, right? We tend to have these gut checks of this feels more like an emotional support need than a financial need. Like I can reassure this person 12 dozen more times that we are following through on the plan, but it's that piece that comes up where you're feeling like you're acting more like a therapist. On the other side of the emotional scale, that's more of like your anxious client. On the other side of the emotional scale is the one who, as soon as you ask them a question, they are breaking down in tears, they are getting up to leave, or they're just shutting down. They're looking down, they're scrolling at their phone, they're not responding to your emails, they're not responding to your, hey, we need to reset your password request. Those kind of two ends of the spectrum where you're feeling like their emotional capacity is preventing you from being able to do your work, that's a really good cue that a therapist could be a good next step. The line that we use in therapy, because we're all going to experience feelings of sadness and stress and anxiety, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to get treatment for it, but the line that we draw is this particular thing impacting the person's ability to function? So in other words, is their stress about money making it hard for them to go to work or complete tasks at work? You might not hear that, but you might hear other things like maybe their partner calls and they're like, as soon as we set up that financial plan, something changed in them. They're constantly like looking at our retirement account or constantly tracking the budget. I can't pull them out. I don't know what to do. Or they're saying things like, I'm so worried about the plan or our money that I can't sleep at night, or I'm not eating anymore, or I'm not really taking care of myself. They used to be a marathon runner and now they're not even getting out of the block. So anything that's impacting their ability to function the way that they were in your eyes is a good cue that it's time.
Incredible
And
answer.
that's,
Oh,
yeah,
go ahead,
that's
Anna Marie.
great. Oh, no, I was just going to follow up on that since you mentioned how to
Yeah.
tell when it's time to refer to
Yeah.
the financial therapist. So,
Yeah.
how would you actually word it? How would you phrase it
You
to
are.
actually communicate to the
Yes.
client that they should see a therapist to not
Posted
come
the
off rude
scripts.
or,
Yes.
yeah.
Um, Maria, so I came up with like these 3 scripts that I'll share with you all now. But if you want like a physical handout to like print and put in your desk, and then you can kind of peek at it when you need to, that's available too. But I think so often when we try to say something uncomfortable, we end up couching it in all of this extra language to try and minimize the amount of discomfort that we sometimes miss it, right? To paint a different example, let's say a friend owes you money for dinner and you're like, oh shoot, I need to ask my friend for that money back. You might do something like this. Oh, I had so much fun at dinner with you the other night. I was just thinking about it. We had the best time. And my Venmo request is still there whenever you get a chance. But you know what? Don't worry about it. I think you gave me like $3 for coffee that one time, so we could probably deduct it. And yeah, when are we going to the movies, right? You're putting all of these other things around the thing that you actually need finished or answered, right? In that instance, you just need your money back. You just need them to pay you back, but you're so worried about offending them that we bury it. So the same kind of thing goes when it comes to inviting a client or, recommending or referring that a client get therapy. It is acknowledging that it's awkward, normalizing it, and then giving them the opportunity to say yes or no. So it literally could sound like, Anna Maria, this might sound a little bit strange, acknowledging it's awkward, but a lot of my clients find that when we're doing financial planning and budgeting and future casting, it gets really, really stressful. Normalize it. So if you're open to it, I'd love to give you a few names of therapists who specialize in this, your choice of what you want to do with it, right? So we're saying, I'm seeing what's going on. I'm honoring that it's a bit uncomfortable. And also, I care about you and you're not alone. And you can do that a few times. And as professionals, we all have to acknowledge I think one of the biggest things that can harm professionals is acknowledging that we all have a limit. Right? We all want to do everything for our clients. We want to give them the best school recommendations and the best neighborhood recommendations and the best vacation recommendations. And sometimes it's just out of our scope. So to honor where you're at can sometimes be the simplest, but also the kindest thing to say something like, I really want to help you with this, but it's really outside of the scope of the work that I do. Right? So that's what I would say.
Where do you think that advisors on this call, and actually maybe even before I start there, the next question, I just wanted to hugely highlight, especially to the college students on the call or that might be watching in the future, what Lindsay said is so true and important to get permission before you just flex on how smart you are. And like she said, you just passed your exam, you're all fired up on the CFP and you want to jam the 100-step financial spreadsheet down their throat, but just pausing and asking maybe what client is your gut feeling to solve this? Or are you open to hearing my recommendations? Is that a decent way to word it, Lindsay?
You nailed it. Exactly. And the more we can say it in the way that feels comfortable for us, the better. And what I will often say in doing this work for a long time and doing a lot of that permission seeking and consent seeking is that most of the time clients are more than willing to hear what you have to say, but none of us like getting a talking at. We like being talked to or talked with. So just hang on for a second. And I would also say that when you do that, we just tend to feel more comfortable, right? So if Colin's telling me this 100-step plan, but he says, "Hey Lindsay, is this okay? Are you cool if we keep going?" I'm gonna immediately feel more comfortable and more honored and be like, wow, Colin actually gets it. This is a lot. I really appreciate what he said. Even though he's throwing a lot at me, I can totally handle it, right? That by default builds that rapport and builds that trust.
Instead of just preaching and
Yeah.
continuing to, it starts to just feel like it's so lopsided.
Yeah, totally, totally.
What do you think advisors today could like, what's maybe something that you see advisors maybe struggling with in asking the correct questions or getting to the why? Obviously, a big one, and I'm sure I'm at fault as much as anyone of trying to shove the 10-step plan down everyone's throat. So that's a good reminder for me. But are there questions that we should be asking around goals or around, you mentioned earlier on the call, like what's blocking them from
Yeah.
taking action? I don't want to get outside of our scope, so I appreciate
Yeah.
you mentioning if the client is being stopped in something,
Mhm.
maybe we need to, if they're unable to function, maybe we need to find another professional that might be outside of our scope. But
Yeah.
sometimes we're just one question away. And
Mhm.
instead of just saying, what are your financial goals?
Yeah.
Is there maybe a better way to ask
Totally.
that and to
Totally.
be a better listener?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love this question because just by default, when we say something like, what are your financial goals? To folks who are in this community, that feels like a very great first step question. But for a lot of my clients, what I can tell you is that oftentimes there's so much shame and so much embarrassment if they don't know what their goals are, or if they have some goals, but they're wondering, like, is that the right goal? Is this person across from me going to judge me or think that I'm too behind, or I'm like too, out there with my goals? So even starting before that, because money's connected to all of it, is just asking them for some information about what their life is like now and how they want it to be in the future and what's kind of getting in the way, right? So just saying, like, tell me a little bit about what's going on. Colin, you tell me, I've got a new baby. We just moved back to Michigan. And I'm like, great, where do you want to be in 5 years? You tell me that. And I say, all right, cool. So you're telling me you maybe want to, upgrade your house or get a bigger place, and you want to save up for, your daughter's school. That sounds good. What do you think's like getting in the way of those two things? Then we are starting to get at some of the financial questions that might be preventing them. And the other thing we can do as we're doing that is also ask your clients how they've succeeded in the past. So, okay, you're here now, you want to be somewhere else in 5 years. How have you typically
That's
been
good.
able to achieve your financial goals? Or what have been some ways that you've been able to move toward, like, tell me some of the things that helped you move across the country, right? What I'm doing there is I'm starting to tease out what are their strengths and how can we use those when it comes to creating the financial plan. I told you as soon as we started talking, my dog was going to start biting. Hold 1 second. I'll be
Take your time. That's really good. I know that I always fall victim to just asking, what are your goals? And
yeah, yeah.
it sounds like the right question, and that's even really what they teach in the financial
Yes.
planning curriculum. But
Mm.
you're right. If you're sitting across from a financial advisor, you're probably going to say things like, send my kids to college and retire at 62,
Yes,
even
yes.
though that might be the last thing that's actually on your mind and what's blocking you from taking action today.
Yeah, yeah. And again, like, just to really drive home the amount of embarrassment and shame that my clients have is so many of them are doing fine financially, but they're so fearful that they are behind or that they're making a mistake or that it's too late. And so the amount of I don't think we often think about it in our types of fields, but the idea of white coat syndrome, like when you go in to see your primary care provider and all of a sudden your heart rate goes up and every time they take your blood pressure it's through the roof. Even if you're very healthy and you don't have high blood pressure, we forget that as professionals we also do that to our clients. So if Colin says, tell me your goals, the person across might be like, oh my gosh, I don't know, what are they? Am I going to be doing them well? Like, we have to remember that we may be experts in our field, but the person sitting across from us, this is either all new to them or they want some help. And so, what a gift it is that they came to you to help them solve this problem. And how can you honor that? That is a huge lift for them to ask for help and to show up in your office physically or virtually.
Yeah, that's great. And I loved how you phrased it on learning in the past, what the ways that worked for them before. Like, I think it's very important to see unique, specific questions that actually work for this person in the past so that you don't just focus on right now. So I think that was a very good point as well.
Yeah.
And shifting also in another area, we know that you also have some of the social media presence as well. So if you could maybe share a little more on how it helped you build the practice, if it helped you at all to grow your business, how you decided to get started with that, and anything else you can share in that area.
Whew, yeah. So when it came to social media and my business, prior to having a business, I didn't have social media at all. So I also saw that social media was a place that a lot of people go to vet products or services, meaning, like, I'm probably not going to go to a new dentist if they don't have a website. I might not buy that new pair of sneakers if they don't have an Instagram account. Sounds terrible, but we all do it. And so for me, it was really about, I think I need to do this, so I guess I'm going to do it. And there wasn't a huge plan around it. Now that I've been doing it for a while, I would say it's, my approach to it is very, very different. And because I track all of my metrics, something that I have learned works for me when it comes to getting clients or to getting media coverage is that I have two kind of main forms of communication and they work in different ways. So clients come to me through search engine optimization. They're Googling things like what is financial anxiety, how to talk to your partner about money, what is money trauma, and then they're finding me through my website. However, I have more of like reporters in media who are finding me through Instagram. And I will say that people might find me through Google and through SEO, but they're vetting me over on social media. So I don't necessarily have clients that are like sliding into my DMs and like, hey, are you taking new clients? But I'm fairly certain that once they find my website, they might poke around and maybe watch a video or watch an Instagram or listen to a podcast, and then they get to see a bit more of who I am, and that helps them to feel safe and supported when they kind of come in to work with me. In terms of how it has complemented my practice, I always say to folks who are in any sort of client-facing role, if you need a client today, you are relying on your network. If you need a client in 6 months, you're relying on search engine optimization or whatever your marketing engine is of choice. That's why I'm always doing both. And that's why I invite everybody here to find like, what are their two tracks? What are the ways to get clients today? And what are the ways to get clients in 6 months? And when you have both of those going, you're planting your seeds now by doing your blog posts so that somebody can find you in 6 months. Or, they start reading your blog for 3 months, and then when they're really ready, then they're like, Anna Maria, I finally am ready. I got this tax refund and I'm ready to start doing something with it, right? So that's how they have kind of played into my business. And you asked a couple more questions about social media. So if you could say them again or remind me of what they were, I can keep going.
No, you're doing great. That was mainly my question. Potentially, how did it complement your business growth? Did you get a big inflow of clients? I know you mentioned that it was going naturally for you, but did you notice once you started doing it, was there a period of time after which you saw the results of it, or are you doing it just for educational purposes? How did you see the results of your work, or
Yeah,
how's
it's a
it
really
going
good
now?
question. So no, I know that sounds really weird, like Lindsay, if it's not working, why do you do it? And I should not say that it doesn't work because it absolutely does, but it is a part of my overall business infrastructure, but it is not the only thing that I'm relying on. Like I said, it's kind of in my business solar system to have different ways for people to connect with me. And when I say connect with me, I don't mean like on a phone call, but I know personally and professionally, sometimes I like to take in my content on a podcast. Sometimes I'm tired and I'm scrolling and I want to get it on TikTok or Instagram. Sometimes I need to like flag a post and come back and read it. To be clear, I don't think everyone should do all of these things at once. If you're starting out on social media or any sort of marketing platform, I would say choose the one that you like the most. Right? Just because someone says, oh, TikTok is like where it's at and that's what you need to be doing. If you are mortified of being on video, then TikTok probably actually isn't the right choice for you. If you find yourself at night scrolling on Pinterest, I personally think Pinterest is super, super underutilized, especially for folks in your field, because it works as a search engine. I hardly do anything to Pinterest and it generates over 100,000 views every single month. And I'm pinning things from my blog posts, things like things that I can imagine being helpful for y'all would be like how to make a monthly budget, how to choose a financial advisor, when is it time to get a financial advisor, how to get your partner on board about seeing a financial planner, right? Those types of things that can fit on a cute little pin and then you've got a blog for them. I mean, anyway, that was my long-winded way of saying choose the platform that you prefer most. And then once you kind of get into a flow and you're starting to see some traction, then if you want to add on. Right now, my social media solar system looks bananas because I have a YouTube video, I strip the audio, I put it on a podcast, I chop up that video and put it onto Instagram. I usually turn that video transcript into a search engine optimization post, and then I share about it. If you're like, Lindsay, I don't have time for all that, do not do it. Pick one thing and do it. And the other thing I would say is you have to get comfortable being bad before you can be good, right? We do not start out being amazing at these things. There will undoubtedly be a cringe period when you look back on your website or when you look back on your social media where you're like, I can't believe that is out on the internet. You have to be bad before you can get good. And the other thing along with like being bad before you can get good is to give yourself some time to see what's working and see what isn't. What I mean by that is a lot of my colleagues who are in private practice, they'll do things like, well, I did 3 Instagram posts and nothing happened. Or I put up 1 YouTube video and nothing happened. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. So give yourself a little challenge. I think places like this can actually be incredibly huge where you can get some accountability, do a little challenge, right? So for the month of June, commit to doing 3 Instagram posts a week or 1 blog post a week. Give yourself some sort of permission to get it out there, because once you have some content out there, then you actually have the data to see of the 10 different posts I've done, which ones have gained the most traction. Okay, great, this one did, then I'm gonna do 10 more almost identical to that or under that topic or around that theme or in that style. But I think what a lot of us do is we do 3 Instagram posts, it didn't work, try YouTube, make 1 video, it doesn't work. Then we go over to TikTok, make 1 TikTok, it doesn't work. And then we're exhausted, we're burnt out, and we've decided marketing doesn't work, which we know isn't true, but it is true that your miles may vary.
Such good advice. And that the best thing I've made the comparison before because we're all money people and we understand compounding. And if
Yes.
if you buy one, make 1 deposit to your 401k, you're like, why am I not rich? That
Yeah.
is social media. Like
Yes.
you need to be consistently making lots of deposits over time, months, weeks, decades, and it just and just like compounding, you'll probably get more followers. And at least for myself, it took like years to get
Yeah.
a couple thousand, and then all of a sudden I'll have a great post and I'll get 1,000 one day. And it's like, how did that happen? Like, where were you guys when I needed you? What the heck? And it is just a tough game that way. So I like how you broke it out into like using your network to find a client today
Yes.
versus using social media to find the client tomorrow, because it's probably not healthy either to just focus on one and then like make a blog post and then just sit around waiting for your phone to ring.
Exactly. Great point, right? I mean, talk again about a great metaphor. We need diversification too, right? We can't
Hey,
just
there
do
we go.
networking. We can't just do blog posts. Like we have to do a little bit of these different things, and everybody's, allocation is going to look different for your business and for what works for you. But it's really hard to build a business on one specific thing. So having some diversity there can be really helpful. And it doesn't mean you have to do everything, but get comfy doing more than one thing.
So sticking on your business, maybe specifically, I noticed there's, we got the book, we have some courses, one-on-one services.
Mhm.
Where are you kind of seeing the business moving forward, and maybe what percentage of your time do you focus most strongly? I mean, the dream would be to just sell millions of copies, right? And then just sit on your couch and hang out. But
Yeah.
where are you kind of planting future seeds?
Great question. So, my private practice, where I see clients one-on-one, had historically been the biggest slice of the income pie. And over the years, that slice of the income pie has changed quite a bit. Right now, it's about 40 to 50% of my income is coming from my clinical work, whereas before, and by before, I mean like even 3 years ago, it was like 80%. So
Wow.
the other things that have made up the slice of the pie, I shared with you, Colin, before I started, that I have a consulting engagement with the University of Michigan here, where I'm creating financial wellness curriculum. And so that is a bigger slice of the pie now, where I'm doing consulting and teaching and education. Other slices of the pie include things like brand deals, paid blog posts, I shouldn't say blog posts, paid articles on places like Self and Vox. It's not a ton of money, but it's like, a little bit of income confetti, if you will.
Yeah.
Other kind of little drips and drabs are courses, affiliate sales, things like that. But the bulk of my income, let me back up. I could be perfectly fine if my only source of income was my clients, and that was my comfort level in taking those additional risks. I am not the type of person who is like, let me do these 1,200 things and earn $1,200, 1,200 different ways. That causes me a lot of anxiety. I wanted one source of income to cover everything, and then that gave me the confidence to start branching out. And the other slice of the pie is things like speaking. So it's been all over the place in terms of where I want to go in the future. I love my one-on-one work, and I have a very full practice with a very long wait list. The last time I checked my wait list, it was over 280 people, which is an
Wow.
amazing problem to have. And also, I don't want to have an agency model. So instead, I have loved, which I didn't know that this was going to be the direction I was going to go. In my work with the University of Michigan, we're doing all of these in-person workshops, and we can have 40 to 50 people in each workshop, which means my capacity to serve more people is just greater. And the opportunity to train people on this model and do a train the trainer model, and then they can take it to their different campuses and universities feels so exciting and so aligned. Like I said, I love my one-on-one work, but it isn't scalable for me given the model that exists, which is hire other therapists and have them take on more work, because that's not something I'm interested in.
Wow, that's pretty genius. So then you're saying, are you, maybe I heard you wrong, but like, you have the one-to-many model that obviously expands capacity.
Yes.
Are you creating a curriculum that other therapists can take then and go implement themselves? Like almost,
That's the plan.
are we franchising this?
That's so great question. So that is the plan. So the way that the model is set up is that I own the intellectual property. We're testing it at the University of Michigan, and then depending on how it goes, I have the capacity to then take it elsewhere and continue to scale. So that is the goal: is to take essentially the mind money balance method to other places so that people can implement it. Thanks for that little cheers. And my
Absolutely.
hope too is that the people that we're training aren't therapists, they're not financial planners. They could be, but they are of all different disciplines, because what we're really teaching there is emotional awareness and a greater understanding of the intersection of money and mental health, and the community element. The community element has completely blown me away. I've almost exclusively done one-on-one work. So to be able to run these workshops and groups where we have complete strangers talking about their relationship with money and watching how that is transformative, that to me is so, so powerful. So it's very, very exciting. So that's where I hope to see it go and grow. And maybe when we check in 3 years, I'll be talking to you all about how the mind money balance method is going, and we'll have a whole nother set of questions.
That's so awesome and so true. Ariel said very inspiring, so cool.
Thanks, Ariel.
Um, and if do those communities actually live somewhere like on a Facebook community or like a Kajabi platform or
Great.
something?
So right now they don't. I have a lot of ideas of where they could go.
Yeah.
The big question, because one of the disclaimers that I give every time I do one of these presentations is, even though I'm a therapist, this isn't therapy, but if you need a resource, here are some resources. Because we know that talking about money can trigger mental health strain and stressors, we want to be really cognizant of doing some sort of online group where, if it's not monitored, how can we monitor for their safety if something happens? So we definitely want to, but the question is, how can we do it while honoring that person's safety in the event that a big emotion is unearthed?
Very respectful. Do you feel that advisors would be potential customers and I mean just students of this work? This isn't just necessarily to
Yeah.
just other individuals. It's like, we've been asking and probing how do we
Hmm.
become better therapists as advisors? Uh,
Yeah.
is this maybe a solution?
I mean, I don't know if it's the solution, but I'm a firm believer that we all have different things that we are interested in. The fact that the folks showed up this evening or are streaming or watching this on YouTube by default tells me they have an interest in the intersection of emotions and money and mental health. And so they may be more likely to take some curriculum like this. And also, the more people we have, in my opinion, that just have this baseline understanding, the better types of services that we can provide, whether we are acting as financial planners or as therapists or even as like college counselors or high school teachers, right? The more we can provide this education and information, I think the richer it makes our work.
Couldn't agree more. Because we are advisors trying to get better, I think I've already probed you so much, but I want to double click even more. When I know that one area that I know I personally struggle with, and our last speaker was talking about a little bit
Yeah.
back in March, was with couples.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll get into a meeting and it's usually the guy who's just overly confident, blah, blah, blah. And maybe he had to drag his spouse there, vice versa. One of them dragged
Yep.
the other one there. And how do you try to like do you ever see that in your practice where maybe one person is like just sitting there, arms crossed, the other one's like, they are this, or, however that goes. How do we kind of bring everyone together in becoming a team? I know this is almost an impossible question to answer. There's no silver bullet here. But as we're just asking, just avoiding the question of what are your goals and trying to be a robot, do you have a strategy of softening maybe that initial, let's get everyone involved here?
Totally. I've got so many ideas. But
Yes. Okay. Well,
one
let's just dive into them. I need to learn here. I need to be better.
So one is, as always, all these things I'm saying, take with a grain of salt and decide whether or not it would fit with your personality and your style. I'm very direct and my clients know that about me, so I can probably get away with this, whereas other people might be like, Lindsay, what did you just say? Sometimes I will start the session if I know that there's going to be somebody who wants to be in charge and somebody who doesn't want to be there at all. And I'll just be very direct and I'll be like, all right, we're going to do something very different. We're going to pretend it's opposite day. And what that means is every question that I ask today, this person is going to have to answer first. I know you're excited. I know you want to do it. And I know that the two of you came here together. So I want to hear from the two of you. Again, you have to play with this language to make it sit with you and make it feel good. The other
Mhm.
thing is just getting comfortable pausing other people. So saying things like, just 1 second, I'm going to pause you real quick, giving the other person a chance to answer.
Mm.
It sounds, again, really intense, but sometimes when we're in that dynamic of one person just talking over, talking over, talking over, they don't even recognize how entrenched that dynamic is. And to give the other person permission to have the floor can help to kind of shake that dynamic up. So that's like a very hands-on way to do it. If you're like, Lindsay, I'm sweating even thinking about it, then please don't do that. Another way that I like to think about it is kind of scaling, asking the clients how close or far they are on either side of the scale of one person wins, one person loses, and a win-win scenario. Where are you on this scale? Because, right, and you can even say, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like one person is winning and one person is losing, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is a win-win scenario to you. So asking them how close or how far they are from having shared goals can be a really great way to get a sense of whether or not they actually are on that same page. Because the other thing is, certain couples just have a very fiery dynamic, and we
Yep.
might be like, this doesn't feel good, but they might be like, we love it. I love that they take control. I control these other domains. I'm just here along for the ride. This feels really cozy to me. So again, it's kind of that permission seeking around whether or not that dynamic is working for them.
Love it. So, so good. That does give me a little bit of the goosebumps being like, all right, Yeah, just totally stop. I mean, not I've definitely paused people before, but like
Sure.
just getting them both involved. Have you heard of Bill Bacharach's value-based roadmap or George Kinder life planning by chance?
Yeah.
There's a few others out
Yeah.
there.
George Kinders, yes.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. So where do you think you differ
Mm.
from maybe other folks who have heard of like financial life planning? And
Yeah.
and do you mind kind of just
No, it's a
sharing
great question.
differences there? I feel like people could get confused.
Yeah, I would say that the work that I do feels very similar to the financial life planning, except that then I pass off the planning part to somebody else. Does that
Okay.
make sense? So I'm doing a lot of what do you want your life to look like? How close or far is it? What are the things you want more of? What are the things you want less of? Right? I'm doing a lot of those questions. Um, and we might kind of start like the skeleton plan, but when it comes to the actual financial planning, again, that's when I'm passing it off to somebody who that is their home discipline and that is their expertise.
Love to hear that. I'm gonna hit you with Bill Bacharach's first question,
Oh,
and I want you to tell me if this is good or bad. And my gut feeling tells me it's better than when I used to come in and be like, "What are your financial goals?" So he always asks, "What about money is important to you?"
yeah, yeah.
And it sounds like kind of almost a silly question because
Mhm.
people will be like, they'll usually give a cliche answer of like, I don't know, like freedom, financial freedom or something, right? And then you'll say, and then what he'll do is spin it around to try to dig deeper and say, great, thanks for answering. What about freedom is
Mm,
important to you?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like
Hmm.
trying to just like go a little bit deeper.
Hmm.
Is that a reasonable place for us to start? Is there something that you like or don't like about that? How can we better build on that maybe? I know I'm asking you off the cuff. I should have absolutely planned it. I didn't know I was going here, by the way. So I'm totally throwing Lindsay under the bus right now.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So I don't dislike that question, and I always come back to, I will answer your question, but it's going to sound like I'm skirting it. I always come back to like this old kind of stat. I don't know if it's a stat or a saying or whatever, but essentially, when somebody's trying to find a therapist to work with, what research shows again and again is it is not about the style of therapy they're trained in or the modality that they're trained in or what diagnoses they are able to treat. It's about whether or not the client and the therapist click, which is why I'm such a huge proponent of being crystal clear that the person you put online or on your website or on your blog is the person that the client will meet in that first phone call or on that first video. There's nothing more jarring than seeing like somebody super professional and buttoned up and thinking that's who you're going to get, and then you get on the call and it's like a surfer person, which is perfectly fine, to be clear, but we want to deliver what the client has ordered. So going back to this question of, is this a good question or not? I think it totally depends on what feels best for you. It actually sounds very familiar, or very similar rather, to a question we ask in a type of therapy called solution focused therapy, where we're trying to figure out what is the goal of the client. And it's called the miracle question. And it is, all right, you go to bed tonight, and when you wake up, the problem that you brought to me today is completely gone. A miracle happened. How do you know when you woke up that that miracle happened? What would be different? And what we're doing there is kind of figuring out what are the barriers, what are the problems, what are the stressors. So what I think we can do in our work, whether when it comes to these types of questions, is like to get underneath to the why, is to really think about how do you know that our financial planning work is going in the right direction? What would have to change with the way that your money is working for you to know that us working together is the right choice, right? Really making sure that all of that fits back into the relationship between the two or the three of you, depending on who you're working with.
That's amazing. I'm a little slow. Let me see if I can say that back to you. So you have a problem, you're talking to the client,
Yep.
and you're saying, okay, how would you know a miracle happened and your problem is gone? You wake up the next morning. how do you feel different, or how would you know that that
Yeah.
problem is gone?
Yes, exactly, exactly. So to paint like a very explicit picture, if I'm working with someone who has chronic pain and they're like, "Oh, I wake up and my pain is gone," that's how I know. That's pretty black and white.
That's
But
easy.
if it's like, "Oh, I wake up and my retirement's fully funded," that's the miracle, let's say.
Yeah.
How would life be different? What would feel different? Oh, I'd actually feel less stressed out, or I'd actually feel like I've got more space in my day to think about other things, right? How would you know? Before you like saw the actual thing, how do you know that it happened? What would be different in your day-to-day life? And then we're getting at like how financial planning can fit into to support them.
That is so good. I don't know if there's like some conversational thing where it's like, a positive question versus like a negative, like how you frame and
Yeah.
ask it.
Mhm.
But I feel like the bill values question I was just referring to, of like,
Yeah.
what about money is important to you? Like it's a little bit more like attacking,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then, you have to double click, well, freedom. Okay, what about freedom is important to you?
Yes.
And I
Yes.
wouldn't have to have my job. What about not having your job is important to you?
Exactly.
Well, because
Exactly.
then I can I'm not stressed and I can
Yeah.
sleep in, I can play with my kids. It's like, oh, that's what's important to you.
Exactly.
Family and freedom, like autonomy,
Mhm.
where you kind of got there a little bit quicker, maybe with, you wake up in the morning and how do you feel different? How do you know your problem's gone? You
Yeah.
could just say right away, like, I can now play with my kids. I don't have to jump in my car and have an hour commute, or I'm less stressed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
just thinking out loud. There's no question there other than just me trying to
No,
dig.
you were just recapping, which is great.
Awesome. So we should probably open it up here. We're already a minute over.
That's all
Any
right.
questions from the group so far? There's been lots of good support, comments here. Definitely want to give some space here, and sorry if we push you a little bit over here, Lindsay. We really appreciate your time.
Okay, these types of conversations, if you can't tell, are so exciting for me. So I'm happy
Uh,
to be here.
They're exciting to us too.
I do have a question. So I read an article about using scaling questions,
Yes.
like asking someone, your financial situation, how do you feel about it on a scale of 1 to 10, that sort of thing. And then I also read that you're supposed to have a positive follow-up, like why so high? But when I have done that, I don't feel like it's gone well. It's like it's never been very smooth, and people are like, well, are you assuming it should be lower? Like,
Yeah,
so
yes.
what tips do you have about maybe implementing that type of question in a way that would be better in general?
Great, great. So the scaling question is huge, and you're spot on that there is a follow-up question that we have to ask. But the purpose of the follow-up question is how are we pulling more strength from them? So if I said to you, it's Vidalia.
Mhm.
Okay. If I said to you, Vidalia, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can retire when you want to retire? And you say 9. And I say, how come not a 10? You're going to be like, wait, 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 what? So instead, we actually want to say, how can we move it towards a positive? And then we would say something like, 9 is great. What made you say 9 instead of a 7? So we're actually scaling it down, and then they say, oh, well, I said a 9 and not a 7 because I auto increased my contributions, or I paid off my student loans. Now I can put more toward it, right? We're trying to get there. Whereas, like, if it's low, say you said a 3 out of 10, I would say to you, what do you think we could do to get you to a 5? Right? So then we're pulling from them, okay, what are some of the things that might be getting in the way? How can we bump you up? So if it's a super high number, we don't want to say why, because then you're like, well, because we want to say, why isn't it lower? And if it's low, we want to try and get them higher. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah,
If
that's
you're
so
trying to,
helpful.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So
one time I asked that. It was the first time I was like reading new questions to use in my intro calls, and I tried that one out, and someone said like a 3, and I was like, why not a 2?
Yeah, and but
Like,
okay, this
I
is
that's
felt
what I
so
was
so
just
weird
about
doing
to
that.
ask.
but
Yeah.
also like
That's what I
that
would have done.
totally, Totally. But actually, what you did there is not bad. Because if you said, why not a two? What you're actually pulling from them are their strengths. And then you could say something like, oh, a three and not a two. How come you didn't rate yourself a two? And they say, well, at least I showed up here today. Right. And you're like, okay, so coming in here was important to you. And following through on that promise gave you a three. That's really interesting. What can we do to get you to a four? So you didn't do anything wrong, you know? But yeah, Ariel said it's helpful to look into motivational interviewing techniques. Exactly. That's exactly where this comes from. Yeah, great tip.
Amazing question. That just the framing there is blowing my mind. It seems so obvious, but it's just not.
And it takes a lot of time for it to be comfortable and it feels so different. It's not super intuitive in the way that we typically speak, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was
Yeah, of
helpful.
course. Of course.
Maybe time for one more question if anyone in the group has one. Or I should say two, so that if we ask one more, it's not so much pressure.
Yeah.
What's a
There
better
you go.
word for that, Lindsay?
We have up to two spaces left.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, there we go. Instead of just putting all the pressure.
Yeah.
Then it's like the last appetizer in the middle of the table. No one's gonna take it.
No, not in the Midwest, they're not.
True, true. New York, that thing's already gone. There was
Yeah,
nothing.
exactly.
Maybe I'll try to end then on just a well-rounded one. This will be potentially tough, but if you could snap your fingers and everyone out there like that you are seeing could just magically like already have one corrective thing. Like I know in my financial planning world, if I could just snap my fingers, everyone would set their savings rate to 10%.
Yeah,
Like that
yeah,
would just be my solve so
yeah.
much issues. What would
Mhm.
be your snap your fingers thing that everyone could just have a little bit better mental health and
Mm.
better relationship with their money?
You know, I ask a lot of these questions, Colin, but I don't often have to answer them. So I'm feeling what it feels like to be in my client's shoes.
And
Um,
that's such a nasty question to throw at you.
no,
I'm
it's
sure
okay. It's
tomorrow or
okay.
tonight you're gonna wake up and be like, oh, I should have said this. But no matter
Yeah,
what you say is gonna be way better than what
yeah.
we're thinking. So it's
I mean,
great.
one thing that comes up. I mean, I want to give two answers, but I'll be a good student
We,
here.
we got time for two. That's perfect.
Okay, cool. So the two things I would say are it's okay to make mistakes with money and you're going to make another one, right? Normalizing that it's okay because I see so many of my clients get so anxious about wanting to do the right thing that sometimes that fear of making a mistake prevents them from taking action. So just normalizing, you're going to make mistakes. That's okay. Most of these things are fixable. And then the other thing is that it often appears that other people have their lives together mentally, financially, emotionally, but we only see what they are willing to share with us. And that goes for finances, that goes for mental health, that goes for relationships, right? I see the truck across the street and I decide how they afforded it. I see a happy couple and I decide that they never fight, right? We make meaning of these things. And if we can just acknowledge that we only see what they are sharing with us, I think that gives us all a little bit more empathy and compassion toward ourselves and toward others too.
Amazing answers. That is so true. I always say that wealth is what you don't see. And
Exactly.
so hard. And that's true probably for mental health, right? But like you don't know,
Yeah,
just see the Instagram pictures and it's like, oh, this couple is so happy. But little do you know,
right.
right when the picture was done, back to bickering. And
Exactly. Yeah, no, I think so much of it is manufactured, which makes sense for many, many reasons, but you know, we only know what we see. But yeah, it's great.
well, Lindsay, this was so helpful to the advisor community here. We can't thank you enough for your time and helping us all become better.
Oh my gosh, it was such a pleasure. Thank you all so much for showing up here or for streaming afterward. And yeah, none of you are alone, and this community is great. So happy to be here.
Awesome. And if
Thank you
people
so
want,
much.
and if people want to connect with you, Lindsay, where should we send them?
Great question. My website and my business, my Instagram, my YouTube, it's all under the same name, which is Mind Money Balance. So you can find me wherever you prefer to show up and we can connect.
Awesome. Thanks again. I'm going to hit the unpause button here so we can stick around, or you're welcome to hop off. Usually we have a few closing remarks for everyone. So I'll go ahead and pause.